Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by the Dude Ranchers Association and produced by Cowboy Spirit Radio Network. Would the West, or America for that matter, have been settled without guns? What's been the most popular firearm of the past? And how do actors learn to use guns in film? Phil Spangenberger, a firearms expert and historian, saddles up to the ranch to talk about all of this and his fascinating career.
Morning, Alan. I missed you last week. I was actually in your old area. We went through Duncan, as I mentioned, and all that kind of stuff. So it's good to be back at the same place.
It's clearly not the same without you, so we're glad you're back here.
Well, I miss you, and it's always good to
How was your trip?
Around. You know, it was great. We went through Duncan. You said we'd blink if we blinked, we'd miss it, but it's a little bigger than that. And we got to see the Sinclair Hotel. I think I talked about that and got a tour of it. And it's a cool place. And we were coming through on a Monday, so some of the stuff was closed. So we had to move on for a meal. But it was fun, and we drove by your front entrance. I mentioned that. And I just had a kid tell me who works here that he goes rock hunting on Round Mountain. He says, just inside New Mexico there. And I said, I know where that is. I know. I know whose ranch that's on there, buddy.
Yeah, we have kind of a semi-famous rock hound area, and
that's what he was telling me.
Yeah, the people come from all over, and I used to have to go rescue them from all kinds of things because people find ways to get stuck and break down all the time.
So that's an important warning. So you may get some good rocks, but you may have to get stuck in the way.
Yeah,
on the way. So
all true.
Well, anyway, today, nothing to do with rocks. We're talking to a gun expert, and Phil Spangenberger joins us he's from the Prescott area, one of the great parts of Arizona. I don't think there's anybody I've ever talked to who didn't like the Prescott area. I mean, good weather, cool town, great history. Anyway, Phil served as True West, our favorite magazine, firearms editor since 2003. He and was a feature editor for Guns and Ammo magazine for 40 years. Gun coach to many Hollywood stars. That's a big job. A lot of guns in a lot of movies. Been a movie extra, guest on the History Channel, consulted on many Old West collections, just to name a few accomplishments. I was reading about how he shoots with two guns and puts the reins in his mouth, and he basically got cowboy mounted shooting started, and that's the old true grit thing, reins in the teeth and two guns a-blasting. Really great to have you, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
Honored to be here. I hope I look good enough for radio.
Yeah, yeah, we're all on radio for a reason, I think.
Yeah. Well, talk a bit about guns. How did you get interested in where you are with guns?
Well, like any kid, we played cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers. Children just seem to have an affinity towards action and things like that. And of course, firearms are just, a great way to engage with people, toy guns and things like that. And it moves to stop that, but the kids still want them, But I think what really got me going was that 1954, I believe, Disneyland TV show when they did 3-part series on Davy Crockett. And when I saw those flintlocks fire, I had never seen anything like that. I knew what they were, but to see them actually fire and the puff of smoke and so on, it just fascinated me. And from then on, I was hooked on antique firearms.
And
that's got me going.
When we do, I'm a million miles from an expert. We do a little black powder shooting here, and there's two sort of, lack of a better word, technologies, flintlocks, and what's the other one? There's two different ways.
Well, there's percussion, cap lock or cap and ball, what most people call it, for the muzzle loading type firearms.
Right.
Yeah. Flintlock and percussion.
Right. Okay. And I think we do the percussion stuff. So, what was the first gun manufactured in America, in the U.S.?
True manufacturing started with the Industrial Revolution in the early 1800s. Before that, the government had ordered some military arms through Harper's Ferry, Springfield Armory, I should say, and private contractors. But those were mostly guns that they would work on kind of individually or almost a small line, using parts supplied by the government, and the government in turn would purchase parts from Europe. But in America, I'd say probably Remington has started around 1816, and they had the honor of being the longest in business. They recently were purchased by another company now, and so I don't know. I guess they'd go back to Colt, but they were also purchased by a Czechoslovakian firm, CZ.
No kidding.
But Remington would go back. That would be the one, I'd say.
And you said Remington 1811? Is it?
No, 1816. They used to, advertise it since 1816. So all the way up till about just a couple of years ago.
Do they not manufacture guns in the U.S. anymore?
They were sold. The company was sold to another company, and I think I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it might have been Ruger. They bought or Browning. I think it was either Ruger or Browning. I think it was Browning, and. Remington still exists, but it's like, I think it's a subsidiary of another company as opposed to its own company.
Right.
But like many companies over a couple of hundred years, businesses change. They go from families to investor corporations, etc. But as far as a commercial entity, it continued manufacturing firearms up until just recently under its own name, and now it's owned by another company.
Yeah.
So if you walked in a gun store today, you couldn't buy an American-made new pistol?
No, one of the things that CZ said, they were going to continue making them in America. They seem to respect and realize that, people that want Colts or firearms of that nature, that they want an American-made arm. Now, of course, the replicas made in Italy and other countries, they can be very fine firearms too. But when you have a name like Colt that goes back to 1836, you want to make sure that you're getting an American-made product. So when CZ bought it, they said they're going to continue making the single action in Colt. I hear rumblings now, and it's not anything more than that they may discontinue that because they're not making enough of them. But you hear these things all the time. Who knows? All you can do is sit back and wait. If you have your Colts, good for you. If you don't have them, maybe you want to get some if you like that stuff.
Does Ruger still make guns in your area?
I'm sorry, say again?
Does Ruger still make guns in your area, weren't they?
Yes, they have a plant here, and they've been making some fine firearms for many years, since the late 40s, early 50s. They're one of the most prosperous and forward-thinking companies there is.
In what way do you think? Because I don't know. Why do you see them as forward thinking? What do they do?
They're constantly coming up with new models that have different advantages to them. They don't rely on the same old, and not that's not a bad thing, but they do come up with new weaponry, new firearms, and variations that people really like. They made the Black Hawk revolver and for so many years, and then all of a sudden they had the Super Black Hawk, and then they come out with a newer model of that. It's very similar but improved, and Ruger's just a good, solid company.
Can you? Is there a quick couple of words about what the changes are? I mean, to me, a pistol's just a pistol, and what would they change that would make people think, "Wow, I want one of these new"?
Well, for example, I'm a single action man, and the old time single actions, you had best to load 5 rather than 6 because the firing pin was a fixed solid pin and it rested on the primer of the old gun. And I have an article coming up on that, where people as famous as Wyatt Earp had accidental discharges of that. And Ruger came up with what they call the transfer bar safety system, where you can load kind of a floating firing pin in some of the different guns that are made today. And that's been a great deal for single action shooters.
And you brought up single action, and I'm guessing some people listening, they're not going to know the difference. What defines single action versus double? Could you give us that?
Well, when you say they're not going to know the difference, everybody, when you purchase a firearm or handle one, you have to take on the responsibility of knowing what you're doing. It's just like you don't have a driver's license, but you'd like to drive my car to see what it's like. I want to make sure you have an understanding of the gas pedal, the steering wheel, et cetera, and it's the same there. But as far as a brief description, single action basically means the function of the revolver in that it only performs one action at a time. And it's ironic because I did an article recently on that to explain it to newcomers and sometimes veterans alike, veteran shooters. But to fire a single action, you have to first cock the hammer back, and nothing will happen until you pull the trigger. And then, so that takes 2 actions, a double action to fire a single action. A double action revolver, all you simply do is squeeze the trigger, and it cocks the hammer and rotates the cylinder, all in one action. So a double action only requires a single action to fire it, and that's what gets confusing to people.
Clear as mud.
Single action and double action means it's the function of the gun. Right. What the gun is capable of doing.
It's referring to the gun, not the
shooter,
the operator.
Yeah, exactly.
What are people still buying guns, and are guns still popular, or is it something that's fading out?
Well, you might say, thanks to a Democratic president and Congress, firearms are selling like hotcakes. Every time there's a Democrat in office, the firearm sales go up higher and higher. You think you've flooded the market with them, and all this new talk about possible confiscation, registration, banning, et cetera, and a lot of it doesn't make any sense, especially when you think, well, they don't enforce the laws they have, politics gets involved, et cetera, and so every time there's a Democrat in charge, gun sales really prosper. They do well under Republicans as well, but not near as much as they do under a Democratic leadership.
A few years back, they banned guns in Australia. And so everybody that was watching that said, all kinds of problems are going to erupt. Could you want to speak a couple of words about that?
I've never been to Australia. I would love to go there sometime, but and I don't know too much about it. I hear they have some sort of crime problem. I think anytime wherever there's people, there's going to be crime. But basically, I don't think it has changed Australia's crime situation that much from things that I've read. And like so many of these legislations and these rulings, it affects the honest gun owner, the sportsman, the collector. You know, they're the ones that are stepped on because they follow the rules. You know, an outlaw is an outlaw because he's not going to follow the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
And the bad guys are going to get firearms or whatever is illegal. It's like drugs.
Yeah.
Same thing, you know, the forbidden fruit. They're going to get it one way or the other.
Well, I think I've been to Australia, and the thing that there were a couple of things surprised me about it, and the thing that was the biggest surprise to me is my perception was that they were sort of American in their appreciation for individualism and self-reliance, and maybe not huge fans of rules, and they were far more down the nanny state road than we were. And so I think that's my very slightly informed opinion, is that that's what their culture, why their culture allowed the gun ban, because they were sort of misled, and then all of a sudden the guns are gone, and there really wasn't any outrage, or at least everything I've read, they sort of accepted it, and I think it just fit their culture more. You know, if there was, as you said, A, we have an amendment, and number two, the culture wouldn't allow it. So I think the concern is usually overblown. Everything's going to be political at the edges. But we need to, Lynn is poking us in the ribs. She says we've hit a break. So we're going to take a break, hear about our great sponsor, the Dude Ranchers Association, and what's going on there.
Today's episode is brought to you in part by the Dude Ranchers Association. Since 1926, the Dude Ranchers Association has been providing the original Western adventure vacation. Whether you're 5 years old, 85, or any age in between, you'll find a Dude Ranch activity just for you. You can be horseback on trails, hike them by foot, or ride ATVs, e-bikes, mountain bikes. And then there's archery, shooting, and if you're near a river, rafting. Or join an art class or lecture, schedule a massage. Hospitality is always top-notch with fantastic meals, including breakfasts out on the range and evening campfires and sing-alongs. Summer vacations, fall breaks, holiday getaways, Dude Ranches are perfect for all. Visit duderanch.org to learn more about the over 90 member ranches and find the perfect ranch for your next vacation. That's duderanch.org, or give them a call. Adventure awaits. Come find your inner cowboy today.
You know, I said earlier, Alan's in my favorite magazine, gets the West out there to the world, True West magazine. You had an article recently, I guess this month, about the Spencer rifle. We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I did a piece on, I'm always looking for interesting angles, especially on firearms that have been written about many times. And so a lot of people knew what the Spencer repeater was, and it was very popular during the Civil War. And I decided to do something on the Spencer going west. And the Army continued to use them. At the end of the Civil War, Christopher Spencer just about went broke because he was only making, once the contracts for the military arms was over and cut off, then he was only making sporting arms, and the government was selling surplus military arms so much cheaper than he could sell his sporting arms for. And they're beautiful. They were beautiful guns, but he couldn't afford to make them. Then they did come up with a newer model of it, but still they needed the help. And eventually, a few years later, they did go broke. and went out of business. But the Spencer carbines, since there were so many of them, thousands and thousands of them, the military continued using them out west, as did the civilians. And it was, at one time, it was about the best repeater you could get. Some people said, well, the Henry was much faster and possibly a little easier to use in some ways. However, the Henry had a light .44 caliber cartridge backed by 26 grains of black powder, a 200 grain bullet, whereas the Spencer used about a 400 plus grain bullet. And I think, as I recall, it was about a 400 grain bullet. And it had about 55, somewhere around 50 or so grains of powder, a lot more punch to it. And there was a statement by one frontiersman said, by far it's the best repeater on available today as of the 1860s. So that's what I did that article about. And Native Americans used them whenever they could get them. Their problem was getting the ammunition supply,
sure,
unless they were friendly. And of course, sometimes they'd be friendly to get the ammo and then go on their...
Not so friendly after.
Yeah. Then jump the reservation or whatever the situation was. There's constant problems. I always say the Army had the toughest job in the land because they were ordered to quell the Indians, put them on reservations, keep them friendly. And once they were there, they had to protect the citizenry against them. Once the Indians were there, then they had to protect the Indians against the unscrupulous whites who were constantly screwing them, cutting them short of their rations that were promised to them, or giving them shoddy merchandise or no merchandise. So, and that was the Army's job to protect the Indians. But anyways, the Spencer rifle and carbine was just a very, very popular arm for many years until the advent of, when they started making Henrys, and then improved Henry, which became the 1866 Winchester, which paved the way for all future lever-action Winchesters from then on.
Are they still manufacturing those today?
Well, I think it's the Italian companies are making Spencer replicas. They're making the model 1865, which had a little what they called a stabler cutoff to save in the military. The military always said the more ammunition you give a soldier, the more he'll shoot. And right after the Civil War, they were really trying to save because we were almost bankrupt, the United States.
Sure.
So they put cutoff, which allowed you to shoot one cartridge at a time, and and load one cartridge at a time, but you could keep the other half dozen or so rounds in the stock where the Spencer ammunition was stored, that was operated through the lever. But that cutoff would forbid you from pushing that ammunition into the chamber, so you would load one into the chamber at a time. But if you needed it, you could flip that little switch, and you had, whatever was left.
You had a repeater then, huh?
Exactly, yeah.
So, changing gears, you've worked with some Hollywood stars. How'd that get going?
Well, I had been, I'd learned to do gun twirling and a lot of different firearms tricks and things, and I was very friendly with some of the firearms rental houses like Stembridge Gun Rentals and the people over at Ellis, and especially with Stembridge. And what actually started, they were doing a movie, The Mountain Men, with Charlton Heston. And the guys at Stembridge asked me to come over and look at some Hawken rifles that they had purchased for the movie. I went over and looked at them, and they were modern replicas that didn't look anything like a Hawken. They had polyurethane stocks, and they had blued barrels instead of long brown barrels. They were short, like a carbine length. And they just, brass furniture and this. And I said, God, they don't look anything like the true Hawkins or the Plains rifles. Anyways, the guy said, geez, I got to use them. I paid all this money for them. I think he had about 15 or 20 of them. I can't remember. I said, well, maybe I can help you. I have a friend that can do what we call uglifying them. He took the finish off, beat them up, wrapped them with rawhide, hung little, brass tacked them. And he did that all within about 2 weeks. And when the guns were shipped back to the prop man, he was just knocked out. He said, oh, I can't believe how good these look. They look like plains rifles that had been cut short for use on horseback and had seen a lot of use and were Indian-owned arms with the tack decorations and all the foo-for-all that they would put on them. And he said, well, you know how to shoot these? And I said, oh, yeah. He said, well, would you mind giving Charlton Heston some lessons on it? I said, not only wouldn't mind, I'd look forward to it. And Heston was a real classy guy, and we got along real good. And I got to know him a little bit because through the NRA, we'd run into each other many times. And that kind of led to one job to another. And it was a couple of years before I did anything else. But then I worked with Mel Gibson. And Mel learned so fast that and did so well in Maverick, the things that I taught him, that all I'd have to do is say, did you see Maverick, when they'd call me about a possible job? And they said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, I taught him all of his tricks. Well, say no more. You're hired.
It's a short but stellar resume. Mel Gibson, huh?
He was fun to work with, and I worked with him again very briefly on the Patriot.
Oh, yeah.
Just gave him a one-day kind of familiarization with a Kentucky rifle, a flintlock rifle, and he was funny because I went to his house in Malibu, and we're in the backyard there and just firing blanks. But I loaded it and I've primed it and, showed him how to do all that. And I said, there's several steps to this, but you just take your time. And sometimes you have to take your time in a hurry, but there's several steps. And I said, I just do it for relaxation. He looks at me, he says, you do this for relaxation?
So I've got it down here that you worked with Leo DiCaprio, Romeo and Juliet. Is that?
Well, everybody but him.
Oh, actually, everybody but him.
Yeah, I worked with John Leguizamo and a black fella there. His name escapes me at the moment, but he was a neat guy. And that was you could almost do a half-hour show about my working with him, because I had to fly to New York on the red eye, and got there in the morning, and here I am dressed in, blue jeans and a fur pile cap and a Western Mackinaw, very cowboyish looking. And there was snow all over New York. And I jumped in a cab and say, I got to go to Brooklyn. The guy says, I don't do Brooklyn. Get out. So the next cab I jumped, before I throw my bag in, I said, do you do Brooklyn? He says, of course I do Brooklyn. I'm a cab driver. And then he couldn't find it, but it was a fun deal.
Was it Harold Perrineau? Was it Harold?
Yeah, Harold Perrineau. He was a great guy. I liked him. And he and I went walking down the street. I said, let's go get some lunch. You know the area where he lived. He was about 2 blocks from a great Italian restaurant. And as we walked by, this white policeman walked by pounding on his shillelagh in his hand, and looking at us real suspicious, a cowboy and a black man. And I said, why is he looking at us like that? And Harold said, they don't see a combination like us very often here.
So
we had a good time. And so I worked with those guys, and Leguizamo, I worked with him in Hollywood. He was renting a place there, and he was a pleasant fellow to work with. So I worked with those guys, but never did work with DiCaprio.
So I have 2 questions. So was Mel kind of the fastest to grasp all this, especially those Maverick style tricks? Was he kind of?
Yeah, probably so, because he had to do the most too. I had to teach him a lot of things. Although Colin Farrell was very, very good too. And I worked with them on American Outlaws, about the Jesse James gang.
Right.
And he played Jesse, and Colin was again, a lot of fun to be around, but very serious. Most of those successful actors and actresses I've worked with, they're like chameleons. They learn. I think they've disciplined themselves because they know I'm there to make them look good.
Right.
They're getting well paid, and they enjoy it. So it depends. Some of them are just a quick, fast draw is all they have to learn, but some of them they wanted to learn all sorts of tricks, and I'd teach them everything I could, and usually I try to watch the film, even if it's just a rental film or something, to see how my work looks on the screen, and I'm pretty pleased with all of them.
Well, you've done a lot of mounted shooting in various shows and movies. You want to talk about that for a minute?
The what shooting?
Mounted shooting from horseback.
Oh, mounted. Oh, yeah. Well, my friend Jim Rogers, and you should interview him sometime probably, but Jim Rogers created it as a sport. I did it as an exhibition, and back around 1988, 89, I got to know Jim, and I was at one of those SAS shoots, the Single Action Shooting Society in Southern California. And I said, Jim, why don't you come? I'm going to do a demonstration of shooting from horseback, because the guys in SAS, they had a barrel on some ropes and they'd move it back and forth. And I said, if you want to see what it's really like, let me bring my horses down. So my wife and I would go down and put on an exhibition. And I told Jim to watch me, that I thought he might get a kick out of it. And he liked the idea that I was using blanks and reactionary balloon targets. And so I became kind of the inspiration of the sport. So I'm kind of proud of that. And, we never imagined it would get to the size that it's gotten to. I later served on the board of directors for 25 years, just retired from that about 3 years ago.
Well, once you see it, it's not hard to believe why. I mean, it's riding a horse fast, killing balloons with real guns. It's
like,
got a lot to recommend it.
Yeah.
They call it barrel racing on steroids.
Well, hey,
it takes a lot of good horsemanship. I'll tell you a funny thing. We did at one of the NFR rodeos in Las Vegas. We had a special mounted shoot, and we invited several rodeo stars to come over and compete. And while they were watching us do it, before they did it, I could hear I was helping load guns for them and so on. And a couple of them said, this is a Yahoo sport. There's nothing to it. Well, when they got up to do it, they realized there was more to it. And I heard several of the same ones saying, boy, that's not as easy as it looks. These people make it look so easy. And you've got to be a good horseman. It's got to be second nature to you. And the same thing, you've got to understand the firearm, the single action revolver, and know when and when not to have it cocked and ready to go. And then, you've got a certain amount of aiming that's required, and it's all split second too, They can go through a couple of these courses in about 9 seconds, some of the faster courses that are set up. And you can't even do that on a motorcycle.
Yeah, right.
It's changing gears as he's running. The motorcycle, you got to manually change gears.
So Winchester 73, Jimmy Stewart's version, classic Western, the final gunfight was shot here at White Stallion, and we have some replicas of that actual gun. And was that one of the most influential Western or guns in the West?
The 1873 Winchester, it was certainly a very, very popular rifle. Between 1873 and 1920, I believe, 21, they made about 170,000 of those 73s. Probably the most, it's hard to say what's the most influential gun, but as far as the most popular gun, hands down would be a double-barreled shotgun. And don't think of that. They think the Colt 45, the 73 Winchester, and so on. But you think about all the immigrants that went out there, the poor families, especially those from the South. After the Civil War, everybody in the South was affected, and they had to leave and start new lives. And by the time they got their wagon, their team, all their belongings, their families together, whatever they needed to head west, they didn't have a lot of money left, and they knew they were going to need some sort of protection. Well, the most versatile and least expensive firearm is generally a shotgun. You can load it with shot, buck and ball, or just ball. And you've got a gun that can take small game or be used for defense. Right. So they're more of those, and they were used to help make the law and break the law. They're used to stagecoaches for protection. And the reason a shotgun is so great is you got those big open tubes that you throw that cartridge in. It's a lot easier than taking a small cartridge into a rifle and fitting it into a little slot or something like that. You can slip those 12 or 10 gauge cartridge paper cartridges into the chambers real quickly, and you don't have to worry about careful aiming from a bouncing stagecoach because that shot is going to spread. So they're very, very popular.
Well, they still say, I've heard multiple times experts say if you're trying to defend your home, that's a gun. I have one last question. Hal Holbrook, do you remember him as an actor, Hal Holbrook? Yeah,
he did that great Mark Twain.
Right, known for Mark Twain and Abraham Lincoln. So he was at the ranch a few times, and he was a good guy, and he was telling me that he had, I think the movie was called The Man with the Golden Gun. I could have the name wrong. And he had to learn
movies,
and he'd had to learn to do a quick draw. And he said, you have to have it in X amount of time, which I can't remember. That's really my question. So that it's in one frame. So it looks like it's quick on screen. So how fast do they have to get that gun out of the holster for that?
Well, I think some of the fastest is about 1/20th of a second, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm nowhere near that fast, and I haven't done it in a while. But when I was younger, with live ammunition, I could pull it out pretty quick, around a little over half a second. And when you think about it, that's pretty darn fast. Yeah. I think almost any decent speed would work. I don't know that there's a particular number, and they can always crank the camera up or down, do what they need to do.
Sure.
I know Mel, he got very good. I never timed anybody on these things because it's all just for fun, and they're using blanks, shooting at nothing.
And how fast could you press your thumb to time it? So
yeah, right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
It's all just hypothetical.
But movies, it's all illusion, and so if you can get the illusion of doing it, the one great thing is the opening of Gunsmoke for so many years. Arvo Ajala was the guy at the far end of the street when Matt Dillon would draw. And if you really watch carefully, Arvo beats him.
I never heard of that.
Now I got to watch.
He's the one that taught in the generation prior to me, Paul Newman and Matt Dillon, and he James Arness. He taught a lot of the movie stars, probably Glenn Ford and all. And Glenn Ford was supposed to be the fastest, and that was an earlier generation. I knew Arvo, and he was good.
Wow.
But if you watch carefully, he gets that gun out first.
They should have had another take. Well, we've gone way over time, and Lynn's kind of reminding us, but we're not so far from Prescott, so when the weather cools back down south, you ought to come visit. We do a little shooting here, and
good.
It'd be great to meet you. So thank you for your time.
You're very entertaining, so we want you back.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You know, Alan, I just got back from New Mexico and sort of lurking around in your old ranch grounds there, and we went all over New Mexico. But it was really kind of extra fun because I'm reading this Blood and Thunder Hampton Sides book, which is spectacular. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in the West. A lot about Kit Carson, the West, Santa Fe Trail, Navajos, lots of information I never had before. But it just is one more book that tells you if you didn't have a gun out here, you weren't going to last very long.
Really?
I mean, you know, and it's another one of those great books, in my view, that's readable, but more importantly, it's unbiased. It just
tells it like it happened.
It tells you, you know, this was one rugged place, and vengeance was on people's minds and in their hearts all the time. And if you didn't have a gun, you really weren't going to be around very long.
That's fascinating.
All right, fans, that's a wrap from the West. A shout out to Stan Houston and his production company. Want to meet Russell and Alan and tour White Stallion Ranch? Then give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram. A little cowboy storytelling, some tours of the ranch. It's all there. Until we meet again, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.